Good morning, everybody. I'm Glenn Vardaman, and I'm teaching the adult Sunday school class at Bryant First Baptist. I want to welcome each one of you here that I see eye to eye, and especially those online. There's a lot of things we could be doing that are good today, but I think, as Jesus said about Mary, Lazarus' brother, we've chosen the best part today to study His Word, and I'm glad that you're all here. We're teaching. I'm teaching in chapter 12 is the focus. It's chapter 11 and 12 of Exodus, and God, in His own time and according to His own plan, is delivering His children, Israel, from bondage, from slavery in Egypt. But He's doing it according to His own plan. There are three phrases that I want you to pay attention to. And the Lord, as He told Moses from the burning bush, I am that I am. He said, you can tell them, I am sent you. That's a self-existent, all-sufficient I am. He is always present, no matter what time it is or whenever we need Him. He's ever present. He said also, I want you to see that He does make a difference between His people. He said, I will make a difference. And probably, I'm kind of guesstimating, from the third or fourth or fifth plague, He said, I'll make a difference. This will not happen to Israel, but it does happen to Egypt. So God makes a difference. I think even today, the same principle between those who choose from their heart to follow Him and those who give lip service, but their heart is far from Him. So I think God does make a difference between His children and the children of the world. He also says something that's really strange to me, and I haven't heard anybody mention it. He said, He speaks even back in chapter 6. He speaks of the children of Israel as His army, while they are yet in Egypt, in bondage, slaves of Pharaoh. But God, who is timeless, you know, the Bible says that 1,000 years is like one day, and one day is like 1,000 years. It does not mean that God can't tell time. It just means He's timeless. He is yesterday and today and forever the same. He is from everlasting to everlasting. So when God calls the slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt His armies, and He says, I will deliver them through mighty wonders and signs, through the plagues. I grew up in Mississippi, poor and in the Delta, and when it used to be we could say you can take that to the bank, but we've learned now that banks fail. But what we were saying in effect, that it's a done deal. So when God calls Israel, while yet slaves, His army, it's a done deal. He knows the future much better than we know the past. So we have seen through Brother Wayne's lesson the 9 plagues, and we're fixing to go through the 10th plague. But I want you to show you, not only is God speaking of things yet future as though they have passed. I'm going to turn and read what He told Moses, if I can find it here. He told Abraham, that his descendants would be as the stars of the sky, when as yet he didn't have one child. And so Abraham said, how can I know this? So he put him in a deep sleep. And he said to Abraham, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them. And they will afflict them 400 years, and also the nation whom they serve I will judge. These 10 plagues. And afterward they shall come out with great possessions. He's going to tell them today in chapter 11 to ask them for gold and silver. And anyway, you'll go to your fathers in peace, and I will bring them out in the 4th generation, here where you have walked. So God promised this about over 400 years ago. So I'm just saying God has already foretold this, that he would lead them out, that they would be his people, and he would be their God. So I'm going to go through chapter 11 also, briefly. He said, and the Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh in Egypt, and afterward he will let you go from here. Not just let you go. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out of here altogether. So speak now in the hearing of the people, and let every man ask from his neighbor, and every woman her neighbor, articles of silver and articles of gold. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, and in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and the sight of the people. So we see here that God is the giver of all good gifts. We do not have anything of which God did not give us. Paul worded it well. He said, according to the gift of grace given. All 3 words are a play on words. They come from the word that Brother Philip talked about last week, charis, which is love. We may get charity from, but it's also the gift of grace. So according to the gift of grace given, we only have what is given to us. It says one more plague. I used to play basketball when I was in my mid-30s at the old Geyer Springs building. I had an invitation from a man named Len Lindo. And he was in the middle of his about middle 50s. And rather than walking or jogging, he'd rather play basketball. So after we finished, got ready to go, he said, just one more game. And when we finished that one, he said, just one more game. And when we finished that one, he said, just one more. But Len Lindo enjoyed playing, and he enjoyed the fellowship, and he always invited me to church, all of us that played. But when God says one more, God's word is true. He means one more. He doesn't keep saying one more. So God means what he says, and his word is true. And according to his character, and the word says that he cannot lie. And not only are they going to let them go, they're going to drive them out. And said, let every man ask of his neighbor. Remember, I read in Genesis 15 that they were going to come out with great possessions. I think this is what they're talking about. Later he will say that they plundered the Egyptians as though they were an army and they had defeated them. But actually, it was God who defeated the Egyptians and led them and delivered his people. So I wondered about this. I read commentator Warren Wiersbe, and he said, could it be, they were slaves for 400 years. Could it be that God was getting them back pay? Was he was he getting back wages? I had a union job, a real good job, best job I could have had. And there were times that we worked without a contract in good faith. And the company in good faith, if we got a 10-cent raise or 25 cents, they reimbursed us. They gave us back pay, back wages. But God, in His infinite power and wisdom, could that be back pay, back wages for all those years they were in bondage and served as slaves? God, He is the only one that can dispense justice with righteousness. And whatever He deems best is right, always. God also, as God gave, according to the gift of grace given, the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. God can, when He led the army, of which He's already spoken of Israel, into the promised land, He sent hornets to drive the people out. God fought the battles for them. If God can send hornets in wartime, in battle, to whom He chooses to send it, then God can give favor. God can confound languages. God can confound reasoning of people whom He is against. So if God is for us, who could be against us? But if you're against God and He's against you, then who can be for you? So God gave the favor. And this is, I remember one of the last lessons I taught, Moses said, God said, I'll send you to deliver them. He said, who am I? And now we find out that Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of the servants and the sight of the people. So God has exalted Moses, and God has come down to deliver Israel, His children Israel, and through the weakness of Moses. So God is doing what He said. Now in 4 through 8, it says, Then Moses said, Thus saith the Lord. So who is He speaking to? Is He speaking to the children of Israel? I think He went out in great anger in verse 8. So I think He's still speaking to Pharaoh. But if we go to the end of last week's lesson, in 28 it says, Pharaoh said to him, Get away from me and take heed to yourself and see my face no more. For in the day you see my face, you shall die. If you don't like the message, kill the messenger. So Moses said, You have spoken well, and I will never see your face again. But here, I think 4 through 8 is probably in that conversation. Moses said, You have spoken well, and I will never see your face again. And then we look over in verse 8 of chapter 11. And then he, Moses, went out from Pharaoh with great anger. So it's almost like chapter 11, 1 through 3 is almost like a parenthetical phrase. It's interjected, or we're given some background. It's almost like a side note, but there's no side note with God. All of His Word is there for a reason. So we get more information in 11 through 3, and 4, we're back in 10, chapter 10, at the end of it. So I think that's what the commentary said, and I think that's right. So we see that Moses, this is a continuing inserted in the end of chapter 10, I think. And Moses said, Thus saith the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, from the firstborn of the female servant who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the animals. So there would be such a cry throughout the land of Egypt, such as never was like before, nor shall ever be like again. It is never happened before, and it will never happen again. This is unique. But he does make a difference between his children and the children of the world, between Israel and Egypt. He said, But against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue, against man or beast. Why? That shows purpose. That you may know that the Lord does make a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. Israel is a chosen generation, a peculiar nation, a special nation. There's places that God says that Israel is the apple of his eye. It's just dear to God. And so he says, Your servants will bow down and tell me to get out, even though Pharaoh has hardened his heart. And all the people who follow you, after that I will go out. And then Moses, went out from Pharaoh with great anger. So I think somehow these passages, the chapter break's not inspired, so go together. And so Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go out of his land. So we know that God, I guess there's some questions. Why did God kill the firstborn? In the Old Testament, in the days of Abraham, there was a patriarchal system. There was a patriarchal priesthood, as in maybe Abraham and maybe Job, but they are leaders over their children and their children's children. And he took care of Aaron, his father. And they are under the protection and the provision, under the umbrella, if you will. You know, the Numbers, and they went in great detail who were the leaders of the tribes, who were the elders, who was over the tribe of Issachar or Judah. So this is an important part. It's not here today in the West, so it's an important part there. And the firstborn is really important under that patriarchal system, because the firstborn, remember how Esau and Jacob struggled over that firstborn, the birthright, the blessing, and they received a double portion of inheritance because they were being groomed to take the place of the, say, Abraham, or the patriarch over the family. So the firstborn, whoever had that position or rank, was the one being groomed at the event of the patriarch's death. So in all of the Bible, and especially in Israel, the firstborn is a big deal. And in Egypt, the firstborn was sacred. You know, Pharaoh was looked at as a god, and they had all of these plagues were against their gods. So they thought of the firstborn son as a god, just like Pharaoh was. So this is a big deal. But was God just? We turn back to 4:23. He says, I'll go to 21 and get the context. This is before Moses ever went before Pharaoh. God's talking to him. He said, and the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do all these wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in your hand. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. And then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. But if you will refuse to let him go, indeed, I will kill your son, your firstborn. So the firstborn son is a big deal in that culture, and even more so in the Egyptian culture, because they considered him to be sacred. So God has drawn a line in the sand, and he is going to treat Israel's firstborn, even as Pharaoh, he's going to treat the Egyptians' firstborn even as Pharaoh treated Israel's firstborn. What did he do? He tried to have them killed, that they would die on the giving birth. He instructed the midwives. And then after that, he tried to drown them, throw them in the river. And we remember the story of Moses and his mother building an ark, having Miriam watch. So God is going to treat, is God just? Only he can dispense justice fairly. He knows all things. So God is going to kill their firstborn. And then he's going to drown Pharaoh and his army. But that was how Pharaoh dealt with the children of Israel. So I think God is just. And one of the commentators said that so God paid Pharaoh back according to his own currency. The way Pharaoh dealt with Israel, so God dealt with Pharaoh and the Egyptians. So he was just in what he did. No, we cannot pass judgment on God because he knows all things. And only God can dispense justice perfectly. So we're starting in chapter 12. So what do we need to be delivered from? You know, we have a lot of health problems. And I know a lot of people with a lot of health problems. You know, there's diabetes and cancer. We fall and have broken bones. There's no end to health problems. Do we need to be delivered from bondage from Egypt? Did they need to be delivered from Egypt? Do we need to be delivered from our health? Do we need to be delivered from a bad marriage? Or money problems? Almost everybody's got money problems. From family problems. Or problems at work. We can get laid off or fired from a job, and we sure enough got money problems and job problems. So here's the point. All humanity, Egypt and Israel and us today, we need to be delivered from death. Because all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and the wages of sin is death. The law of sin and death, of a cause and effect. We sin, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. So here's our problem. Our problem is not diabetes. Our problem is not high blood pressure. Our problem is not cancer. Those things lead to death. Our problem is dying. The Bible says the last enemy to be destroyed is death for those who are saved, who are washed in the blood. So therefore, Passover celebrates our deliverance from death. You know, that's what it was all about. In Israel there, they were speaking specifically of their firstborn, of which had a great importance in their culture at the time. So we talk about in 12 here, the beginnings. It says, now the Lord spoke to Moses. This is in chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the first year. Speak to all the congregation of Israel. On the 10th of the month, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for the household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to the house take it according to the number of the persons. According to each man's need, you shall make your count for the lamb. The lamb shall be without blemish. It shall a male of the first year, and you shall take it from the sheep and from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the house where they eat it. Then shall they eat the flesh that night, roasted in fire, with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. They shall eat it. Do not eat it raw nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, his head with its legs and his entrails. You shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. And thus saith the Lord, you shall eat it with a belt on your waist and sandals on your feet, and eat it and a staff in your right hand, so you shall eat it with haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So he's given them specific instructions. You have to think about, why is God sovereign, and what right does God have to instruct us? By right of creation. It is he that has made us and not we ourselves. We're fearfully and wonderfully made, and that our soul knows very well. God made us. God has made 75 souls, counting Joseph, that was already in Egypt, and his family, into, when they leave the armies, 600,000 men of fighting age that were, I think, around 20 to 50 that were able to fight, plus women and children. I think they were several million. They had big, 2 or 3 million. They had big families. So, and this is in 4 generations. This is in 400 years. God kept his promise to Abraham, the one he made when as yet Abraham didn't have one child yet. God has glorified himself in these plagues and keeping his promise to Abraham. So we see here, we have God is creating a nation out of Jacob and his family that came down into Egypt. A nation. So we have a nation, and by right of deliverance from bondage, he is setting up a new calendar. This is new beginnings, a new nation. This is the first month of the first year, and this is the first time in verse 3 that they've been called a congregation. Do we not speak of ourselves as a congregation, as a church, an ecclesia, an assembly, a congregation? We have a fine meeting place here. But our church is not a building. It is us. It is the assembly. It is the congregation, of which is used for the first time in the Bible in verse 3 of chapter 12. So he gives them specific instructions. We've set up a new calendar. We have a new nation. And we're fixing to set up a new memorial that we're going to celebrate that the death angel passed over you by the blood of the Lamb. Now we know that is a picture or a shadow, a type of the Passover, our Passover, who is Christ, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. So we see this, and we can see it in some of the particulars, specifically on the 10th day of the first month. You shall take a lamb, and it shall, let's see, in verse 5, he says, your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year, and you shall examine it to the 14th to make sure that it's without spot or blemish. And we can see this is Christ. He said, who convinces me of sin? And if you don't convince me of sin, then why do you not hear me? So he is without sin, and he was 40 days in the wilderness, tempted by Satan, yet without sin. So without spot or blemish. It's a picture, and it says from the sheep or goats. You know, I'm not sure about the goats, but it's according to what a man hath, and not according to what he doesn't have. So most people probably could afford a sheep, but maybe the goats were for the poor. You know, Mary and Joseph, they offered 2 turtle doves at the circumcision of Jesus. So they were poor. God made provision in the law for the poor. I think God is a God of underdogs. When we're prideful, he opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. So the poor and needy in the Bible, the widows and orphans, the strangers, God is with them, and he wants us to treat them the way he has treated us also. To be, when you've done it to the least of these, you have done it to me. So I think maybe that's what it means about the goats. In the same month, the whole assembly, the whole congregation shall kill it at twilight. So this is not, we will find out later on when this comes to pass. But God foreknows what they're going to do, and he's setting up the instruction because he has delivered them, and he's made them a nation and set up a new calendar, and he's setting up a new memorial for himself about what he has done and how he delivered the nation of Israel from Egypt. So is a memorial for all their generations. So you have it, examine it from the 10th to the 14th, and you shall kill it at twilight, at sundown, at even, and you shall apply it. You know, blood without application doesn't help us any. So you have to put it on the doorpost. They would not have been delivered if they didn't obey. To obey is better than sacrifice. But the instructions are to sacrifice and obey the particulars. We don't have to understand. We have the Word of God, and we have instruction, And he has told us what he requires of us. What is our reasonable service of worship? He has told us. So we need to study that we would know and learn to do and to please him in all things with our lives. So he's kill it, put the blood on the door. Now I had a question. I got something in my margin and I don't know the answer to. For the most part, they lived in tents. They traveled about. So did they keep putting blood on the door of the tent? I don't know how that worked out, but God knows. And he knows what was reasonable and what was a reasonable request. So, but here, I think they lived in houses for 400 years. And so they put it on the doorpost and on the lintel. And he gives them instructions of how to eat it. He actually was giving them a Passover meal that the firstborn would not be killed in Israel as it was in Egypt. And he gave them a way out. Exodus is the way out. He's given them a way out from death. And he's leading them out of bondage. Egyptian bondage, but also bondage from sin. For us, for them also. So he's given the instructions. They're going to eat a big meal. But it is a picture. You know, God, when Adam and Eve covered sin, they covered themselves with fig leaves. But God covered them with animal skins, a picture of innocent blood shed. So these lambs didn't do anything to God or Egypt or to anybody. But this is another picture, a shadow or type of Jesus, of whom Jesus is the substance. They're all pointing to him. An innocent lamb is killed, slain, but he also fed the nation, the armies, if you will, and prepared them for their journey to Sinai. So you're not to have any left, and it's all to be roasted. And, you know, we have a lot of threes in the Bible. In 11 it says, you shall eat it with a belt on your waist, sandals on your feet, and staff in your hand. Be ready to go. You know, he's not only going to let you go, he's going to drive you out when in my time. So I wonder if that's a whole burnt offering. He said there should be nothing left. You should burn it with fire. A picture of one of the sacrifices offered by the law in the Old Testament. So when we get right down to it, in verse 12, it says, for I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night and strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. Against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Now the blood shall be for a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. I wonder if an Egyptian had believed in God in faith and acted on that faith and put blood on the doorpost. If he heard these instructions. I don't know that he gave it to Egypt, but there was a mixed multitude that came out. I don't know if they lost their firstborn or not. But Israel wouldn't have been delivered. They would have lost their firstborn if they hadn't put the blood on the doorpost and followed God's instructions carefully. So here we are today. Is the blood on the doorpost of our heart? Has it been applied? In a time of judgment, the Bible says that is pointed for a time for man to die and then the judgment. Is the blood applied to our heart? Does it make a difference in our heart? Does it make a difference in our life? The New Testament says that we're to be a living sacrifice. If the blood is applied to the doorpost of our heart, then it will make a difference. Trying to remember, I think it's James that says, show me your faith without works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. It makes a difference. If the blood is applied to the doorpost of our hearts, then our lives will reflect that. It cannot be hid. So God says on in 14 that this shall be a memorial, and you shall keep it throughout all your generations. And then it talks later that you shall teach your children. When they ask why we do this, what does this mean? In 27, it says, so the people bowed and worshipped, and the children of Israel went away and did so just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did. I have in my margin, is this a John 3:16 of the Old Testament? But so this is the Old Testament, and I've talked a little bit about what it means to us today in the New Testament. What does the New Testament say about it? This Passover. It has a lot to say about it. Hebrews 8 says these things are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 5 that the Christ is our Passover, and he has been sacrificed for us. And Hebrews 9 says, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin. Even Jesus said on the last Passover, when he instituted the Lord's Supper, he said, I have desired with great desire to take this Passover with you. But he said, broke the bread and said, take this bread, this is my body given for you, broken for you. And he said, take this cup and drink of it, all of you. For this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. Remember, without blood, there's no remission, no forgiveness. So, therefore, if the blood has been applied to the doorpost of our hearts, then we're not our own. We have been bought with a price. Therefore, we are to glorify God in our bodies, which is our reasonable service of worship, to be a living sacrifice, to live out from the blood on our heart. I thank you very much for your time. And online, we have a few announcements here. We will continue our Sunday school. Well, let's see if I'm wrong. Today is the 3rd. It said the deacons, a building debt retirement offering day, and the deacons will meet after the services. On Wednesday, we'll have a Bible study for the adults and teens and Explorer Bible classes on campus. And next Sunday, we will have the same, except we will have Evan Castleberry and Sarah Cowell's wedding. And don't we go to too many funerals? Won't it be a joy to go to a wedding? And Evan, who has grown up in this church. We still have our classes the next Wednesday, and we just have a fish fry October 31st and Trunk Fest, something for us to do on what the world calls trick or treat. on Halloween. I want to thank you for all you who are online, and we'll say goodbye to you. If you have prayer requests, please send them to Miss D, call the church, or Brother Philip, or even myself, or Brother Wayne. Just call somebody and let us know, and we'll get them in the bulletin. I'll say goodbye to you.